This video, or mostly audio, is about a different version of physics. Anomalies always bug me. Here's a device that makes weird anomalies, things that cannot be explained by standard physics, or at least not the way they offer it. People see ghosts and all kinds of other crazy stuff that potentially can't be explained by modern physics. And I think there is an explanation that makes all of these things and what people see all match. And this starts out with the shaman view of reality. They say that all the worlds are dream worlds. And it's an interesting idea. So how is it possible that this world is the same as a dream world, or what that really means? And the physics I go back to explain this is going to be a book written by Wilbert Smith, and it's called The New Science. It's available on the internet. I will leave a link to it if I can. And anyway, he goes through dimensional theory. So he starts off with the idea of length. And you look at length and you're like, okay, there it is. Here's our first dimension. You can look at length any way you want, and it's still going to be length. Most people would say length one way, the other way, and the other way. That makes 3D space, but Wilbert Smith said no, length is still length. 90 degrees to length would be area. And area, now that's something new. So next 90 degrees to area, most people is going to figure out it's going to be three-dimensional space. So might actually show up as 12 dimensions. 12 sides when you look at our reality, but still we get our first 3 dimensions being three-dimensional space. The next dimension past something that just sits there, next 90 degrees is going to be movement or spin. So we got our spin. He says this is a time field. He views time as a field force. And so that's the next one. One past that, instead of spin, is going to be a divergent spin. So a spiral outward, I guess, or inward. And the mathematical term is divergence that he uses. That is also known as an electric field. So that's our second field force. The third field force is going to be curl, which is another mathematical thing. But if you put an electric field, or electric current, through a coil, you are going to get a magnetic field. So that is how he describes the first 3 dimensions. I'm sorry, the first 6 dimensions. Our 3D space, our 3 field forces, and the next one he describes as just like a magnetic field, only it can be any direction. So imagine putting a magnetic current through this steel wire. It's plastic-coated steel wire. And you will get a magnetic field, but it can be any direction. It's kind of an interesting idea. Here's Aircore copper version of that. Bob Greenier calls these the Bagel Coil for good reason, or at least I guess because that's where the information, that's what they called it, the bagel game. And here's this guy's coil, obviously another level more complex than mine. So it makes a stable magnetic field on the outer shell. It can be right or left-hand spin. This one is left-hand spin. And so I wound it left and then left again, so it's stable. This one here is wound alternately. I think it's left and then right, but it might have been right and then left. It's also springy, so I need paper to contain it. Well, it's not really going in. Anyway, but this one works as an antenna. It does not make a stable field. Can't get it back in there. There it is. Anyway, it does not make a stable field at all. Works good as an antenna, though. So it's more like a radio antenna. And then the Caudius coil, something Wilbert Smith did, also makes something that's not stable, that just zips off into infinity, but it does it differently than a standard radio antenna. The field formats are changed. Anyway, the real trick behind these things, he's got all the math and everything on it and how it all works. They certainly are stable, and they sit around for a while. I put 7.2 megahertz into this coil, and days later, these things hit me. I put 100 watts in, gave me a scar, which is now healing. One hit inside my mouth and did a bunch of damage there, and then I also had one hit me somewhere inside my body that made me horribly tired for about 2 weeks. Could hardly stay awake. Definitely dangerous things to be playing with. But these apparently make the same thing as what would be called a cork, only they're big. You get left hand or right hand spin, you can get charge on them, you get all the same properties as you get the corks, and you can put them together to make things. But you can run 60 cycles through this. And by the way, I can feel the 60 cycle ones hit me, but they don't burn because I'm only putting in 3 or 4 watts. So they certainly persist. Other people have said, like Cosmic Dave on YouTube, he's got he winds these and has verified that they make stable magnetic patterns that float around. I don't think I can get mine on video because, I mean, they're invisible after all. They're hard to detect. The 7.2 megahertz one I did with this coil, I put a radio receiver right where I had made it, passed it all through, couldn't detect it at all, yet it still burned me days later. So anyway, it's definitely reproducible. It's just really hard to detect if they're not on the frequency of where you're at. Which brings me to the idea of, if these do make something just like the quarks, and this is what builds the fundamental particles, then reality as we know it, all this matter, it's all running at the same frequency, which is why it interferes with each other. And if you change the frequency, it's not that detectable from one place to another, so you can get the stacked realities like the shamans and the spiritual people talk about. Now this device here, my friends called it the Curious device, and it uses high voltage electrostatic. It no longer functions because of conductive plastics on the acrylic discs, but it used to make a low frequency, like 1 cycle per second, AC high voltage field that flipped back and forth. Now I know it made the same field this did, only this has magnetic on the outer shell. This thing made electric outer shell. Of course, I know how to make this go now. I just put low frequency, high voltage AC into it, and that should make it do what it did before. It's got 50 sectors here. I think the highest that should work is 51. I probably should have done 48, and if I rebuild it, I would do 48. But we'll see what I can get out of this machine. And I'm trying to think of what else. I actually wrote a list of what I'm supposed to talk about. Oh, the big important thing behind Wilbert Smith's thing and this Bagel Coil stuff and all the rest of this is that if reality is made out of these shapes, but obviously microscopic and not the size of a room like this thing makes, the field forces are all shared. You should be able to talk between all these other places with the field forces. They are detectable. It's how you can get a ghost, or whatever you want to call it, walking through the middle of a room, and you can hear it on an electrostatic or a sensitive magnetic meter, and you can literally see their footsteps as they lift their feet up in this alternate dimension and create a slight electrostatic charge, which I have personally seen. And modern physics tells us you can't actually see ghosts, they're not real, but this thing definitely makes a ghost. He even talks about it that way. So, that's a big thing. The other big trick is Wilbert Smith, if you go on to the other dimensions, he says the first 3 are 3D space, then you get the field forces. The next set is the control grid, where consciousness controls and creates reality. The next set is the perception grid. Well, I'm sure I bore people going through my thoughts on those, but the most important thing is right above the magnetic field, where this guy should be making things. He calls that, well, he calls this basically random, a magnetic field that can be anything. And the next one is free will or decision. He says this is where consciousness can alter reality. But he says this world is frozen in the dimension right above magnetism. So this place is very hard to change. Now, if the field forces are shared, it means you can create something in a dream world, a machine that goes through and should be able to melt this reality into basically a dream world so you can alter it, but you have to do it indirect. Now, I tried this experiment. It's really hard to imagine a working device. I mean, heck, I've got this here in front of me physically, and it's hard to get it to run. Imagine trying to create this in a dream world and have it actually do something real and get back to the field forces. I've only managed to do that once so far, and this would be darn near impossible to catch on camera, so I'm not going to try until I can do it consistently. These discs counter-rotate when it's working, right? Anyway, so I thought that was an interesting idea. The other idea to talk about is the Lorenz Force. That has always been a mass force, large-scale type of thing, and it propagates at the speed of light. There's a lot of research to be done in that, and I think this is how energy is created. But I suppose that's another thing. Anyway, so there's the update of how a version of reality can happen with fundamental particles created by whatever. My camera is not focusing lately. Anyway, but that's the way there can be no anomalies. I don't see a single thing that cannot be explained by this more complex version of what reality is made out of, and why things appear to not be very solid. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention the Carl Frederick Kraft. He's got some interesting books, and he shows, once you realize that his little diagrams are a lot like these guys, and he says here's how a proton is made, how an electron is made, how you go through and put them together to make a carbon atom. Lots of detailed stuff as to how this would play out with chemistry and end up making all of the atoms. And I guess I am almost out of time with my camera. So that's about it. Leave comments if any of this questions, anything like that. This is the third time I've recorded it. I don't think I'm going to do it again, because I don't think I'm going to be any better the fourth time. Okay, bye.